People think marriages usually end with one big fight. One betrayal. One explosive moment that changes everything. Mine didn't. It ended quietly. One sacrifice at a time. One dream postponed after another. One sentence left unsaid. Until one day, the man I had spent 11 years loving looked me in the eyes and told me I was the reason his life wasn't moving forward. Those words didn't just end my marriage. They changed my life forever. My name is Emma. When this story began, I was 34 years old. If someone had asked me then whether I was happy, I probably would have said yes. Not because my life was perfect. Because I'd convinced myself that making someone else happy was enough. I met my husband, Ryan, when we were both 22. He was funny, confident. The kind of man who could make an entire room laugh without even trying. I was quieter, more comfortable listening than talking. He used to tell people, "Emma keeps me grounded." At the time, I thought that was a compliment. Years later, I'd realize he meant something very different. When we got married, neither of us had much. Ryan had just started working in sales. I had recently graduated with a degree in interior design. I dreamed of opening a small design studio someday. Nothing extravagant. Just a cozy place where I could help people turn houses into homes. Ryan always smiled when I talked about it. One day, that became our favorite phrase. One day we'd travel. One day we'd buy a house. One day I'd open my studio. One day we'd have children. We believed we had all the time in the world. Life had other plans. 2 years into our marriage, Ryan was offered a promotion. It required relocating to another city. His excitement filled the apartment. Mine was quieter. Because I had just been offered my first full-time design position. The kind of opportunity I'd worked toward for years. When I told Ryan, he hugged me. "I'm so proud of you." Then he looked away. "My promotion starts next month." Neither of us spoke. We both understood what that meant. One of us had to give something up. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Ryan slept peacefully beside me. By sunrise, I'd made my decision. I declined my dream job, packed our apartment, and moved with him. Whenever people praised Ryan's career, no one knew there had once been 2 dreams in that marriage. At first, I didn't mind. I found freelance design projects online, worked from home, decorated our little townhouse, supported Ryan through long workdays. Whenever he came home exhausted, dinner was ready, laundry was folded, bills were paid. Not because he asked. Because I loved him. I believed marriage meant carrying each other when life became heavy. Ryan's career exploded. Promotion after promotion. Bonuses. Business trips. Leadership conferences. New suits. Better cars. His confidence grew with every success. Mine slowly disappeared. One evening, he returned home carrying a bottle of champagne. I made regional manager. I threw my arms around him. "We should celebrate." He smiled. "Actually, my team already planned something." "Oh, I'll be late." He kissed my forehead and left again. I stood alone in the kitchen, holding 2 champagne glasses I'd already taken from the cabinet. Little moments like that became normal. Business dinners, networking events, weekend conferences. Whenever spouses were invited, Ryan usually found an excuse. "They're mostly talking about work. You'd be bored. It's easier if I go alone." At first, I believed him. Eventually, I stopped asking. One Saturday afternoon, my best friend Lily came over for coffee. She looked around the house. You've redecorated again. I laughed. I get bored. She smiled. Emma, you could absolutely do this professionally. I shrugged. Maybe someday. She frowned. You've been saying someday for almost 10 years. Her words stayed with me long after she left. That evening, I mentioned the idea to Ryan. What if I started my own design business? He barely looked up from his laptop. Now, well, I've been thinking about it. He sighed. Emma, my career is really demanding right now. I know. If you start a business, who's going to keep everything here running? I looked around the house. The laundry, the cooking, the errands. He finally looked at me. Exactly. I smiled weakly. We'd figure it out. He closed his laptop. There isn't enough time. For both of us. Those words settled heavily between us. For both of us. Funny. I'd somehow managed to support both of us for years. Yet my dreams suddenly seemed inconvenient. Months passed. Ryan changed. Not overnight. Gradually. His phone was always in his hand. His conversations became shorter. He smiled less. Whenever I shared something exciting, a new client, a creative idea, a design sketch, his response rarely changed. That's nice. Then he'd return to answering emails. The loneliness surprised me more than anything. It's possible to live in the same house as someone and still feel completely alone. One Friday evening, Ryan invited several coworkers over for dinner. I spent the entire day cooking, cleaning, setting the table. Everything had to be perfect. As everyone sat together, one of his colleagues smiled at me. So, Emma, what do you do? Before I could answer, Ryan laughed. She keeps me organized. Everyone chuckled politely. I forced a smile. I actually studied interior design. His coworker looked interested. Oh, really? Ryan interrupted. She hasn't worked in years. Something inside me sank. Not because of what he said. Because of what he left out. He never mentioned the sacrifices. The freelance work. The opportunities I'd turned down. I had become invisible inside my own marriage. Later that night, after everyone left, I quietly washed the dishes. Ryan walked into the kitchen. They really liked dinner. I'm glad. He noticed I wasn't smiling. What's wrong? I placed the last plate into the dishwasher. When your coworker asked what I do, you answered for me. He looked confused. So, I'm more than someone who keeps your schedule organized. He sighed. Emma, it wasn't a big deal. It was to me. The conversation grew tense. For the first time in years, I didn't stay quiet. I've spent 11 years supporting your dreams. I've never asked you to give them up. I only wanted room for mine. Ryan rubbed his forehead. You don't understand. Then explain. My career is at a different level now. I need complete focus. I stared at him. So do I. He laughed. Not cruelly. Dismissively. As a freelancer? I felt my heart drop. No. As someone who still has dreams. The room fell silent. Ryan walked toward the window, then spoke without turning around. I've been thinking about this for a long time. Every muscle in my body tensed. I don't think we're growing in the same direction anymore. What does that mean? He turned slowly. His expression was calm. Too calm. I think you're holding me back. The words echoed through the kitchen. Holding me back. I searched his face, waiting for him to say he didn't mean it. He didn't. Instead, He continued. I need a partner who's as ambitious as I am. My voice barely worked. I gave up my career. For yours. I never asked you to. The sentence hit harder than anything else he'd said. Technically, he was right. He hadn't asked. I'd chosen him. Again. And again. And again. So, I whispered. What happens now? He looked away. I've already rented an apartment closer to work. I blinked. You already? He nodded. I think we should divorce. Not discuss. Not try counseling. Not fight for us. Simply end it. I looked around the kitchen we'd renovated together. The dining table we'd picked out on our 5th anniversary. The family photographs lining the hallway. How long had he been planning this? How many dinners had we shared while he already knew he was leaving? Ryan picked up a small overnight bag waiting near the front door. He had packed before the conversation. Before giving me a chance to speak. He stopped beside me. I hope one day you'll understand. I looked at him quietly. No. I hope one day. You will. He hesitated. Then walked out. The front door clicked shut behind him. The house became painfully silent. For several minutes. I simply stood there. Unable to move. Unable to cry. Unable to believe that 11 years had ended with one sentence. You're holding me back. The next morning, sunlight filled the kitchen. Ryan's coffee mug still sat beside the sink. His jacket was still hanging near the door. Tiny reminders of a life that no longer existed. I slowly walked into the spare bedroom, opened the closet, and found the box that had been sitting untouched for over a decade. Inside were my old design portfolios, sketchbooks, paint samples, business ideas, dreams. Dreams I'd carefully packed away, because I believed love required sacrifice. As I turned the first page, one folded piece of paper slipped onto the floor. It was an old business plan I'd written 11 years earlier. Across the top, in bold handwriting, were 4 words I'd completely forgotten. Emma Carter Design Studio. I stared at the page for a long time. Then, for the first time since Ryan left, I smiled. Very slightly. Because maybe, just maybe, the life he believed was holding him back was about to become the life that finally set me free. People often think starting over begins with confidence. It doesn't. It begins with fear. With uncertainty. With standing in front of a future you've never imagined and taking one small step anyway. That's exactly where I found myself. Standing in the middle of my quiet living room. Holding an 11-year-old business plan. Wondering if it was too late to become the woman I'd once dreamed of being. The morning after Ryan left, the house felt unfamiliar. Every room reminded me of something we'd built together. The kitchen where we'd celebrated promotions. The couch where we'd planned vacations we'd never took. The bedroom that suddenly felt far too large for one person. For the first few weeks, I moved through life like someone walking underwater. Friends called. Neighbors stopped by. Everyone offered sympathy. But once the visitors went home, the silence returned. One afternoon, my best friend Lily knocked on my door carrying 2 cups of coffee. She took one look at me and sighed. You've barely left this house, have you? I managed a weak smile. I've been busy. She looked around. The laundry is folded. The floors are spotless. The pantry is organized. Then she looked me in the eyes. You're cleaning because you're hurting. I laughed softly. You know me too well. I do. She reached into her bag and pulled out my old sketchbook. The last time I was here, I borrowed this. I stared at it. I forgot. She opened it. Beautiful interior designs filled every page. Restaurants, living rooms, boutique hotels, coffee shops, dreams. Lily smiled. I didn't. She turned to the first page. At the top was the logo I'd designed years earlier. Emma Carter Design Studio. I always loved this. I looked away. That woman doesn't exist anymore. Lily closed the sketchbook. No. She's been waiting. Her words stayed with me all week. Every morning I found myself opening that sketchbook. Every evening I added one new drawing. Then another. Something inside me slowly began waking up again. Not because the pain had disappeared. Because purpose was beginning to replace it. Money, however, was another story. Divorce wasn't cheap. Although we sold the house and divided the proceeds fairly, my share wasn't enough to live comfortably while starting a business. I rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment above an old bakery. The floors creaked. The windows rattled whenever trucks drove by. The kitchen was barely larger than a closet. Ironically, it reminded me of the apartment Ryan and I had shared when we first met. Only this time, I was alone. I bought a second-hand desk, an old laptop, a used printer. That became my office. Every morning at 7, I sat down with a cup of coffee and searched for clients. Most days, no one answered. Sometimes I sent 20 proposals without receiving a single reply. Doubt returned quickly. Maybe Ryan had been right. Maybe I wasn't ambitious enough. Maybe I'd waited too long. Whenever those thoughts appeared, I forced myself to draw one more design. Then another. One step. Every single day. 3 months later, the phone finally rang. A woman named Mrs. Hernandez owned a small neighborhood bakery. I can't afford a big design company. I heard you're just getting started. I smiled. I am. She laughed. Perfect. So am I. When I visited her bakery, the walls were faded. The furniture didn't match. The display cases looked tired. Most people saw an old shop. I saw possibilities. I spent an entire weekend redesigning everything on paper. Warm colors, better lighting, comfortable seating, a window display that invited people inside. When I presented my ideas, Mrs. Hernandez cried. I've never seen my little bakery look so beautiful. It was the first time anyone had looked at my work the way I always hoped they would. The renovation took 3 weeks. I painted walls alongside contractors. Built display shelves myself to save money. Stayed until midnight arranging furniture. When the bakery reopened, customers poured inside. Within a month, sales had nearly doubled. Mrs. Hernandez insisted on telling everyone who redesigned her store. Word spread faster than I expected. Soon, a florist called. Then a bookstore. Then a children's clothing boutique. Each project led to another. None of them were glamorous. But each one gave me something priceless. Confidence. 2 years passed. My tiny apartment office became too small. I rented a small studio downtown. Nothing fancy. Just enough room for 2 drafting tables and a meeting space. I hired my first employee, a recent design graduate named Olivia. On her first day, she looked around nervously. I've always wanted to work somewhere that actually values creativity. I smiled. So have I. Around the same time, Lily stopped by with a newspaper. She placed it on my desk. Look. There, on the business page, was a familiar face. Ryan. The headline read, Regional Sales Executive Announces Major Expansion Initiative. I studied the photograph. Same expensive suit. Same confident smile. For a moment, the old pain returned. Then I noticed something unexpected. I didn't miss him. I missed the version of myself I'd been when we were together. The woman who believed love required becoming smaller. That woman was gone. Another year passed. My company continued growing. We specialized in transforming small local businesses into warm, inviting spaces. We weren't the biggest firm in the city, but we developed a reputation for listening. Clients often said, "You design for people, not just buildings." I considered that the greatest compliment I could receive. One autumn afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a regional small business conference. At first, I almost declined. Public speaking had never been my strength. Then I remembered something Grandma used to say. The opportunities that scare you the most often change you the most. So, I accepted. The conference hotel buzzed with entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, consultants. I stood backstage reviewing my notes. My palms were sweating. Olivia smiled. "You'll be amazing." "I hope so. They're lucky to hear your story." Before I could answer, the event coordinator hurried over. "Emma, you're on in 2 minutes." I took one deep breath, then walked onto the stage. The audience applauded politely. I adjusted the microphone, looked across the room, and froze. Near the front row sat Ryan. He hadn't seen me yet. He was talking with another executive, still wearing expensive suits, still carrying himself with confidence. Then, he looked up. Our eyes met. Recognition spread across his face. Complete shock. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then the moderator announced, "Please welcome founder and creative director of Emma Carter Design Studio." The audience applauded. Ryan slowly turned toward the stage. His expression changed from surprise to disbelief. I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, because I realized something. 3 years earlier, he had walked away believing I lacked ambition. Now, I stood on a stage because I had finally believed in myself. The presentation lasted 45 minutes. I spoke about rebuilding after failure, about taking creative risks, about supporting small businesses. When I finished, the audience rose to its feet. Standing ovation. As people lined up afterward to ask questions, I noticed Ryan waiting quietly near the exit. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched, like someone trying to understand how everything had changed. Eventually, the crowd thinned. I gathered my notes, picked up my bag, and walked toward the hallway. Just as I reached the elevator, a familiar voice spoke behind me. "Emma." I turned. Ryan stood there. He looked almost exactly the same, except for one thing. The certainty that had once defined him was gone. He smiled nervously. "I almost didn't recognize you." I returned the smile politely. "It's been a long time." He nodded. "You've done incredibly well." "Thank you." He looked around the conference center. "I've been hearing your company's name all day." There was another pause. Finally, he asked quietly, "Would you have time for coffee tomorrow?" I looked at him for a long moment. The man who once believed I was holding him back now stood asking for a conversation. Not as my husband, but as someone who suddenly realized he'd never truly seen the woman standing in front of him. I considered his question, then answered, 1 hour. No more." He nodded. "I'll take it." As I stepped into the elevator, the doors slowly closed between us. For the first time since our divorce, I wasn't wondering what I'd lost. I was wondering why he had come back now, and whether the answers he carried would finally set both of us free. People often imagine closure as something dramatic. A grand apology, a second chance, a movie-like ending where everything suddenly makes sense. Real life rarely works that way. Sometimes, closure is simply hearing the truth and realizing you no longer need it. That was exactly what happened the morning I met Ryan for coffee. The cafe sat on a quiet corner, just a few blocks from the conference center. It was small, warm, the kind of place where conversations felt private even when other people were nearby. I arrived 10 minutes early. Old habit. Ryan walked in exactly on time. He looked different than the man I'd married. Not older, just tired. The confidence that once filled every room had been replaced by something quieter. Humility. He smiled awkwardly. "Thank you for coming." I nodded toward the empty chair. "You said you only needed an hour. I won't keep you longer." For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The waitress brought coffee. We thanked her. Then silence settled between us again. Finally, Ryan sighed. "I watched your presentation yesterday." I smiled politely. "Thank you." "You looked." He searched for the right word. "Happy." I hadn't expected that observation. "I am." He nodded slowly. I could tell. Ryan stirred his coffee without drinking it. I've replayed that night in our kitchen 1,000 times. I looked at him calmly. "The night I left." "I know. I wish I could take those words back. You were holding me back." He closed his eyes briefly. "I believed them." "I know. And I was wrong. For years. I had imagined hearing those words. Strangely, they didn't feel as satisfying as I'd expected. Because they belonged to a version of me that no longer existed." Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Do you know what happened after our divorce?" "I know what I read in the newspaper." He laughed softly. "That wasn't the whole story." He looked out the window. "My promotions continued. I made more money than I ever imagined. Bigger office. Luxury apartment. International travel. Everything I'd once convinced myself would make me happy." He smiled sadly. "It didn't." "What changed?" I asked quietly. "I stopped having someone to celebrate with." He looked at me. "When I got promoted before, you were always the first person I called. When I bought my first expensive car, there was no one waiting to see it. When I received another bonus, I realized I was eating dinner alone." He laughed bitterly. "I spent years climbing a ladder. When I reached the top, I discovered it was leaning against the wrong wall." I let those words settle. Then asked, "Did someone hurt you?" He nodded. "I eventually married someone I met through work. I hadn't known. It lasted less than 2 years. What happened? We loved each other's success. But we never learned how to love each other." His smile faded. The marriage looked perfect. It felt empty. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Ryan looked directly at me. "I used to think ambition meant never slowing down. You taught me something I didn't understand until it was too late." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Success means very little if there's no one you respect enough to share it with." I smiled gently. "I learned something too." He looked surprised. "I used to believe supporting someone meant forgetting myself." I shook my head. "Love shouldn't require either person to disappear." Ryan nodded slowly. "I understand that now." He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a neatly wrapped folder. "I brought something." He slid it across the table. "What is it?" "Open it." Inside were photographs, magazine articles, newspaper clippings. Every single one featured my company. Some I'd never even seen. I looked at him. You kept these? He smiled. Every time I saw your name. I cut out the article. I laughed quietly. Why? Because I was proud of you. Then he corrected himself. No. I was amazed by you. One article caught my attention. It featured a community center my team had redesigned free of charge. I looked up. I don't remember this interview. Ryan smiled. You said something. He pointed to a highlighted sentence. I read it aloud. The spaces we create should remind people they're valued before anyone says a word. He looked at me. That's who you've always been. I just didn't appreciate it. The waitress refilled our coffee. The conversation became lighter. We talked about old friends. Our college years. Charlie. Ryan smiled. I miss that dog. I laughed. He still chases squirrels like he's a puppy. I'm glad. Eventually. Ryan glanced at his watch. My hour's almost up. So is mine. He hesitated. Then quietly asked, Can I ask you one final question? I nodded. Did you ever hate me? I thought carefully before answering. There were moments when I was angry. There were moments when I was deeply hurt. But hate? I shook my head. No. Hate would have kept me connected to my worst memories. I wanted freedom instead. Ryan smiled. I always knew you were stronger than I was. I laughed. No. I just had to learn who I was. After I stopped trying to become who someone else wanted. He stood. So, this is goodbye? I looked at him. I think. This is peace. He extended his hand. For a second. I considered it. Then I stepped forward and hugged him. Not because I wanted our marriage back. Not because I had forgotten the pain. Because carrying resentment had become heavier than letting it go. He hugged me briefly. Then stepped back. Thank you. For what? For becoming exactly who you were always meant to be. Ryan walked toward the door. Halfway there. He turned around one last time. You know. You never held me back. He smiled sadly. I was running away from myself. Then he disappeared into the morning crowd. Months passed. Life continued moving forward. Our design studio expanded into a second location. Olivia became a partner in the company. We hired young designers fresh out of college. Whenever they doubted themselves, I always told them the same thing. Never shrink your dreams to make someone else comfortable. One spring afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at my old university. Standing in the same lecture hall where I'd once imagined my future. I smiled. The room was filled with graduating design students. Nervous. Excited. Hopeful. One young woman raised her hand. What if the people we love don't believe in our dreams? The room became completely quiet. I remembered sitting in my own apartment years earlier, wondering exactly the same thing. I smiled gently. Sometimes, the people who love you can only imagine the life they'd choose, not the one that's meant for you. You don't need everyone to understand your dream. You only need the courage to keep building it. The students applauded. As they gathered around afterward, one professor walked over carrying an old yearbook. I've wanted to show you something. She opened it to my graduation photo. Beneath my picture, someone had written, most likely to create beautiful spaces. I laughed. I forgot about that. She smiled. You finally did. That evening, I returned to my studio after everyone had gone home. The building was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows. Design sketches covered the walls. Laughter from earlier in the day still seemed to linger in the room. I walked slowly from desk to desk, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. Ryan hadn't built this. Neither had heartbreak. I had. One small decision at a time. One difficult day after another. One act of believing in myself. As I locked the front door, I looked up at the company sign. Emma Carter Design Studio, the same 4 words I'd written in an old notebook 11 years earlier. The dream hadn't disappeared. It had simply waited for me to stop waiting for permission. If this story stayed with you, remember this. Never allow someone else's limited vision to become the limit of your own life. The people who truly love you won't ask you to become smaller so they can feel bigger. Real love leaves room for both people to grow. And sometimes, the greatest success isn't proving someone wrong. It's proving to yourself that you were capable all along. The end. Thank you.